Welcome to Digital Currents, brought to you by Morgan Creek Digital. I'm Xavier Segura. Each episode, we spotlight the topics and people changing the tech industry with a focus on AI, blockchain, chips, and big data. Thanks for listening, and please make sure to subscribe if you like what you hear. And remember, stay current.
Mark, Happy New Year. I was a little bit down for the count, but I'm back and ready to start another amazing 2025. And you did a phenomenal job by yourself. I hope it's not a regular occurrence, but you did awesome.
No, it can't be a regular occurrence because it was most uncomfortable. I hate just talking to a screen. I much prefer talking to you. So glad you're back. Glad you're feeling better, looking better, and appreciate the navy blue on the feed. So, just a quick review. I am not wearing the normal Bitcoin colors today because we're doing this early so I can go to Miami for the big game. But I did, just by happenstance, put on the old school 2010, believe it or not, 2010, the logo for Bitcoin was yellow, not orange. It didn't change to orange until 2011. And so that's the one we know and love. But appreciate the navy blue, and hopefully it all plays out tomorrow night. We Domers want it to. So
we didn't get a chance first to fully rehash. We did on our last show together a great summary of what happened in 2024, and we left out some things that happened kind of in the personal side on college football, which we just really teased out. But yeah, I think Notre Dame is looking as strong as I've seen them in 20 years, and I think that's
for sure. And look,
good place.
People ask, how do you feel? I'm like, well, I'm always nervous going to these games, and I personally have a bad track record of bowl games. Now, mostly, obviously, I have nothing to do with it because I'm not on the field. But to your point, over the last really 30 years, we haven't been that great. We've had some good teams, but we haven't been great.
Yeah.
His team, interestingly, is really, really good. And we saw that against Georgia, and we saw it against Indiana. And they say defense wins championships. And we know that to be true, particularly in football. And, it's how Michigan did it 2 years ago, or a year, not even 2 years ago, 1 year ago.
Still doing it against Alabama, which was the only time, Mark, that Alabama has been beaten twice in the same year by the same team. Which is
oh my gosh, that's right. That's incredible. That is incredible. And and again, it was all defense.
Yep.
But this defensive team for Notre Dame, it's the third best in school history, and we've had some good defenses. But averaging less than 14 points a game, giving up. And if you do that, you're going to win a lot of football games. Full stop.
No doubt. So I guess we can jump in. It hasn't been too long since we've done this, so we're going to go straight into this. And I think as we saw 2024 close out, there's some promise of what will be coming here in 2025. One of the things that we covered, which was not incidental, was the industry cleaning itself up. Right. Which in some ways, I haven't seen this argument made, but maybe we can follow the logic here, Mark, that in order to get things like congressional favorability, there needed to be a cleaning up or a new shakedown so that, markets can gain that level of confidence by their, by their stakeholders, which those we vote for in office. And so one of the things we mentioned was some people just had to have their day in court. And another person is set to have their day in court. I don't know, where we're going with this, Mark, is Do Kwon, who pled, surprise, surprise, not guilty in his first U.S. appearance. Now, for the listeners, he is the co-founder of Terraform Labs. And basically, this was related to the collapse of his firm, his crypto, back in 2022. And this was really, Mark, might have been the beginning of the downturn and kind of a real
Sure.
lack of confidence that took us several years to recover from. And I think this sort of continues along that track that a couple, kind of like the French Revolution, right? Some people just had to go for democracy to take place. And so I think to democratize something like digital assets, other people are going to have their day in court, and we're expecting one here. What are your thoughts?
No, look, I think you said it well. There will always be bad eggs, bad people, bad organizations that pop up around money.
Yeah.
And, whether that is the boiler rooms in the stock market, whether that is, we talked about this, the fraudulent, gold mining maps that were sold to the poor defenseless, miners back in the 1860s. So when there's money involved, scammers are going to scam. But those scammers getting caught, getting convicted, getting punished doesn't negate the positives of the things that drove them to want to scam, right? The stock market is still a really magnificent place to invest, to create wealth, to build businesses, to provide liquidity to companies. And so because there are still penny stock scams, doesn't mean we should shut it all down. And because there were a few bad eggs in crypto, like Sam Bankman-Fried and this guy and countless others, doesn't mean that the technology is bad and that we need to go back and ignore it. Now, the incumbents will play it the opposite. They'll say, oh, this is proof that, this technology can't be trusted. And let's take FTX.
Mm-hmm.
FTX was not a crypto problem. It wasn't a blockchain problem. It wasn't a Bitcoin problem. It was a bad guy doing bad things problem, right? A person or persons was stealing money from customers and using it for personal benefit. That is as old as time itself. That has been going on since, Roman times, Egyptian times. So speaking of Egyptian times, I ran across over the holidays, for whatever reason, they were posting Steve Martin doing King Tut on Saturday Night Live.
Classic.
Such a classic, so epic. And, and then it goes to the whole thing about why are there so many towns named Cairo in America?
Oh, yes.
And why do they all line up? This is the weird one. All 9 of them line up on the path of total darkness of the last solar eclipse. That one makes no sense to me.
Yeah, I think, Mark, it must be related to, which is something we didn't touch on, all of the UFO sightings in northern New Jersey, which there were some rumors that it was my disappearance was somehow linked to that. I can debunk those. It was not.
We can neither confirm nor deny
That's
X's
right.
disappearance and inability to do digital currents.
One thing, Mark, we also saw recently here, which we can get back to, is on the semiconductor. So last year we spent a lot of times speaking about the growth of this market. And so folks asked us, well, why do we do this? Well, because increasingly those worlds are colliding. The private investment world, where we play in venture capital, early stage companies, and of course, where the consumer world thrives and just allowing us even to do things like this show and this podcast, which have relied very heavily on these kinds of chips. So we saw kind of a couple of signal indicators, Mark, recently. Although it's still early, we did get some news over from Samsung, and their preliminary Q4 results don't look great, where kind of that profit has really fallen short of the estimates. And sort of on the flip side, it pays to be NVIDIA, right? That was the big story last year. They continue to soar. I'm debated or not to pull this into a chart of the week. I have a couple of contenders, which I'll throw at you at the buzzer at the end.
Yep.
But it's really something that shows, hey, these guys have already had an early indication of strength this year, or at least market speculation indicates that they are strong. But you kind of have these two companies, which we highlight them as, well, really, they're the two leaders in this space. And you kind of have them going like this in kind of opposite ends. So, Mark, I know you've had some thoughts on NVIDIA. they started the year at 1 trillion, they go to 2, they go to 3, they're going to hit 4 trillion this year. Whether or not, that's under their own merits is another question entirely. I was a little disappointed with Samsung, but I think there's a lot of baseball to be played here. What are your thoughts on these guys?
Look, I think the challenge in technology industry broadly, semiconductors more specifically, and then chips even more specifically, is the different steps in the process have different levels of profitability and therefore different levels of valuation. And the probably lowest profitability part of the food chain is the actual manufacturing of the chips, right? The TSMCs, the Samsungs, the World Semiconductor, and the reason is that it's commodity-esque and it's still monopolistic or duopolistic or oligopolistic or whatever, oligopolistic. There's still a small number, but you do have some ability. If TSMC is charging too much, you can go to Samsung. If Samsung's charging too much, you can go someplace else. And there aren't infinite, but there's more than zero or more than one. And so I think the next layer is the tools, right? The machines that make the chips. That's super profitable because there's essentially one, and it's really not just one, but ASML in Europe is the company that makes the vast majority of intelligence. Forget the artificial part, but intelligence in terms of printing chips through photolithography. Well, then there's the part that's the super profitable, which is the design. Right. And so what NVIDIA is, right, they don't make the semiconductors. They farm that up to TSMC. They don't make the machines that make the semiconductors. They don't care who makes the machine. There's the actual manufacturing of the chip. There's the machines that do the manufacturing. Then there's the design. And design, it's the human brain kind of figuring out what the best design is. And what, NVIDIA did is they said, hey, there's this CPU, central processing, and then we created this video processing, and that seems to be faster. So could we create a GPU, a graphics processor? Long story short, they did, and it became popular. And now we're seeing a replacement of CPUs with GPUs. But more importantly, NVIDIA convinced the world, probably properly, maybe not exclusively, but properly, that their particular chip was the best chip for training these new AI models, these LLMs. Mm-hmm. Fast forward, everyone freaks out and says, oh, I got to buy a bunch of chips. So, Elon buys a bunch of chips and everybody else buys a bunch of chips. And so now there's this race and they do more in sales in a quarter than they did the previous year, and the stock price explodes. Now, I still believe the stock is wildly overvalued. People try to say, oh, it's only 33 times next year's earnings. That's still really expensive, and it's 36 times revenues. So you're like, so they have 90+% margins? They actually don't, but they have high margins. So long story short, what they do is they acquire other technology like Mellanox, right, which was the parent company of the team that, formed Chain Reaction, one of our portfolio companies. So they bought Mellanox. Well, why did they buy Mellanox? Well, Mellanox had this technology that was needed to do some of the adaptation to GPUs. Make a long story short, they said, well, you could buy the competitor, but then we won't give you any chips. So if you want our chips, you got to buy this, and it's a match made in heaven. And so now what they've done, genius, and I think I mentioned last week on the show, I actually bought one of these for my son for Christmas. So people have heard of Raspberry Pis, the little computer that you can play with. And Jensen, right before Christmas, announced that they had created the Jetson. I love it. Not Jensen, but Jetson, like the cartoon, Nano, which was basically a Raspberry Pi, but instead of a CPU, you got a GPU. And it was like $249. Not that that's not, it's not nothing, but it's not a lot of money. And this is great. Perfect Christmas present. Bought one. And, my son's eyes bugged out of his head. Oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And you got to figure out what you're going to do with it.
Yeah, that's not the important part, right, Mark? The important part is that they get the new shiny, bright object so they can take it to school whenever they come back, and then they'll figure it out later.
No, it's exactly right. And he can tell everybody that he has a GPU
In the club.
And it's super exciting because he's a techno nerd. His big present, though, actually was a 3D printer, which has been going nonstop, which is really, I thought it was kind of silly, but it's pretty amazing what he's been able to make. But the other piece of that is 2 days ago at CES, Jensen was up on stage. It was funny. Someone said, the richer I get, the shinier my coat gets. So he, from the burnished leather to the shiny black leather. So he must have got a new coat for Christmas. And long story is, he announced 15 new product innovations, one of which is pretty amazing. In May, and I think I'll probably buy one, you will be able to buy a desktop, and it's not even really a full desktop. It's like a little mini, like a Mac block that is 1,000 times faster than the fastest home-based PC using a CPU. And, you'll be able to run LLMs with over 2 billion parameters local. And that's a lot of parameters. And so they are innovating and they are moving into new markets. And the one chart he showed that, I don't know if it'll be the chart of the week, but the one chart he showed that, was the big parabola. And it's a little fuzzy in all the pictures, but the bottom line is he said that agentic robotics is going to be the, next multi-trillion-dollar industry, which is a little funny because literally the night before that, just by random happenstance, we watched The Creator. So I don't know if you've seen that movie or not, but
it's been on my list. I keep going to it. I thought it was, when I first saw the title, I thought it was going to be something a little bit less dark than when I saw the
oh no, it's dark.
There, and it gets dark.
It's dark, and it has an okay kind of resolution. Okay. It's not quite as dark. But there are some dark parts, but the basic premise is the symbionts, the AI have, are quote unquote waging war. And then you find out maybe it's not exactly how it's been reported, which is kind of a cool twist, but actually a well done movie. The CGI, unbelievable. I mean, unbelievable. But anyway, but it's only set in 2065. And so the next day, Jensen's pointing to agentic AI. Like, I don't want that. I do not want what I just saw in The Creator. I don't want to go to war against robots. That's not on my bingo card.
Yeah, that's not a battle that we can win, Mark. And I'm glad that you mentioned the CES headlines, because that was really the kind of the dominant story on this. And one of the things I don't talk about as much, kind of prior to the investment career, spending time on the tech side, one of the things that I probably miss the least is having to go to CES, which is, if you've ever been, it is a big spectacle of a show in Las Vegas when everybody is still kind of half in their mind back in their hometowns for their holidays, and they're not really ready for the full-blown theatrics that is CES in Vegas. And it was all about AI. So you had all of the big companies debuting their latest chips. So, the Intels, the AMDs, Qualcomms of the world, they were all there, of course. And one thing I thought that was not there, which I think is kind of an interesting question, is this representation of China and kind of their growth within AI. So I think China's growth in AI is kind of like the most China way that they can do it, which is relying upon themselves, right? So if you kind of look at the growth of these chips, right, Mark? I mean, I'm sure it's something you're thinking about.
No, such an important point. And I don't mean to interrupt, but it's critically the point, which is everyone's hating on China and everybody's afraid of China. The China market, even though it had an okay year last year, I mean, it was up 24%, almost as much as the U.S., but at one point it was up 50 and then it went down. Everybody's like, oh, see, like up 24 is still pretty good.
Yeah.
And it was on fears of the tariff wars. But what the tariff wars miss is your point, which is China now doesn't care because they know, because they took 700 million people out of poverty and put them in the middle class, they could be completely insular and just service that 700 million and be totally fine.
Absolutely.
And so what they've done very, not so quietly, but quietly because we don't talk about it in the U.S.
Right.
But quietly is they've taken semiconductor manufacturing expertise, shall we say, out of the U.S. and out of Taiwan and put it in place in China. And the big announcement, I think it was the same day as CES, was SMIC, which is a Chinese semiconductor manufacturer, basically said 50% off. Whatever TSMC is charging, we'll do it for 50%. Now, of course, Trump is saying, well, we'll put 100% tariff on it, so it'll be the same price. But the fact that they can do it for 50 cents on the dollar is pretty amazing. And the fact that, 90-some% of AI citations come out of China. But the stat that blew me away, and I'll have this chart in my 10 surprises next week, is 15 years ago, I think it was 15 years ago, China made 1% of the world's automobiles. Wow. What do you think they make today?
I mean, just the fact that it's 1% is staggering to me because a lot of the growth, in particular in the EV market, which is the growth of the auto market, is coming from China. So,
and that's what I think today.
Big. At least
39.
Yeah, I'll
39.
Oh my God.
No, that's
wild.
And it's why, if you look at the price of Porsche and the price of Volkswagen and the price of Daimler they're all down.
Yeah,
Tesla's up, but everything else is down. And it's not because Tesla's killing them. And Tesla's doing fine. Crazy price, but doing fine. But if you went to China 10 years ago, every other car was a Volkswagen.
Yep.
Seriously, every other car. And then they went, over the last 5 years, they kind of went in this thing where Buick became the cool car. Like everybody's, driver was driving a Buick. Thought that was weird, but I think it was because Tiger Woods, literally.
I was going to say, they must be huge golf fans, right?
Yeah, I guess that was it. But now they're all BYD. And I don't know if you saw the video. This was insane. The BYD supercar literally jumped over a pothole. Literally, the suspension. And again, you won't remember this, but when I was growing up, there was a show called Speed Racer.
Oh, of course. That was my first screen name, Racer X.
Oh my God. That's right. That's right. So Speed Racer,
brother.
I would run because it started at 3:00. I got out of school at 3:00. I would run from Robert Frost Elementary School to watch Speed Racer. And, it had the little feet that would pop out.
Oh, yeah.
And the Mach 5 could jump.
Mach 5.
This car, it didn't have the feet, but it actually left the ground.
Love it. We need one in Jersey immediately. These roads
we need
and congestion pricing is not helping because all of the money that's in New Jersey is now flowing into New York to make their roads even worse. But we'll find out. We won't digress too much. And I think maybe one thing that I also wanted to get from you, Mark, I know we covered this a little bit, is some of the projections on and predictions for this year for a couple of minutes on that, because I think what we had in 2024, some of it was predictable, but some of it was also things we weren't yet expecting. So as we kind of come into 2025, one of the predictions that I'm kind of feeling some intrigue on is that we will finally see a close to the impact of the 2021 bubble, which is kind of like the actual end of kind of like the COVID impact as it relates to our industry, right? Because there'll be long-term impacts felt, for forever. But I think that's kind of a big one, along with the return of the IPO market and continued things like M&A. And of course, I'll cheat and say we're going to see more of the same with the idea of an increase in just openness and communication around Web3 and crypto being mainstays. So not a question of, do we really need this, but more of, okay, I get that this isn't going away, so how can I make money off of this, is going to sort of be the next kind of conversation. Mark, what say you on some, without stealing too much thunder from next week, some of the quick...
No. I mean, next week is more about broad macro. We do our 10 surprises on all the macro, and one of them deals with digital. Mm-hmm. But, in our ABCDs, in the A, I think an easy prediction is that LLMs, right, which are kind of like synonymous with AI right now, become fine. They become foundational, and they're kind of, table stakes. But this idea of AI agents that actually work, and we talk about little things like, if you and I are having a conversation and we decide we're going to go on a trip, I should literally be able to say, hey, agent, or whatever it's going to be called, travel bot, hey, book my flight to go with X to the Middle East.
Right.
And right now you can't do that, right? You can get your fingers on a keyboard and you can go to different websites and you can make it happen, but you don't have an agentic AI that can do that completely. But that, I don't know if it happens this year, but I think we're headed that direction. So agents and agentic AI, I think, is the 2025 topic du jour. I do think that will expose, I hope, the overvaluation of just these core, you say you're an AI company and suddenly you're worth $1 gazillion. I mean, that has never made, it's like .com, changing your name to .com, or Long Island Blockchain. It was still a T company. So I hope some of that froth gets pulled out. So I'll say that's kind of two predictions. On the B, on the blockchain, I think it started last year, but I think it will get acknowledged and accepted that this year that the B is the next tech cycle, right? We had the mainframe, and then the microcomputer, and then the personal computer, and then the internet, and then the mobile net, and now we have this decentralized net, or truth net, as I like to call it. But I think that's the biggest prediction there, other than, no one's going to like this one, but the 4-year cycle still exists. Crypto winter will come back. So I think a lot of people are going to be disappointed that we don't go up only. So then on the C, I think this year is a huge year for chips. And so that's why we now are spending so much of our time there. I think there'll be some huge announcements in FHE, which is fully homomorphic encrypted in the encrypted cloud. I actually think that's going to be one of the biggest markets in the world. My son got victimized by it. I just got victimized by it. That big data leak where they got everything, and they got into my son, and they tried to get into his Coinbase account. Unfortunately, he locked it down before they got him. They got my debit card. I never used my debit card, but they got it. This guy in Jakarta spent $2,300 before I could stop him. Now I'll get the money back from the bank, but that needs to end, right? You can't have your data be vulnerable just because it's in the cloud somewhere. It needs to stay encrypted. So I think FHE is going to be big. I think this NVIDIA, I can't remember the name of it, but it's coming out in May. I think that's a big deal. GPU on your desk is a big deal. I will say demand will exceed supply there. I think there's going to be a bottleneck problem because we've already heard stories that they can't get enough Blackwell chips for the people who want them. Now they're going to start putting them in $3,000 boxes versus $50,000 a chip. I just don't, that doesn't make sense to me. So we'll see what happens there, but I hope they can work through the bottleneck issues. In chips, I am so happy, and I say I'm so happy. I don't ever like pain for people, but what happened in the quantum computing public stocks was so dumb. I mean, it's a couple things. So one, you had these companies that somehow got public just because they said they were in the quantum computing. They actually don't do very much. In fact, 3 of them do nothing at all. One kinda has some customers, but measured in single dollar millions, and they went up to 10 billion of market cap. So total, and then everyone was saying these things are going to the moon because Google announced Willow, which gamed the announcement by saying, oh, we solved this problem that would take a regular computer, 2.7 septillion years. Well, but you designed the problem that a normal computer couldn't solve so that you could say you solved it, but it's not useful. It's not a calculation. It's not accurate. You still have the problem of not being accurate. You don't have enough qubits to make quantum work. So Jensen at CES says, well, if you're measuring quantum in, say, 15 years, I think you're too fast. If you say 30 years, you're too slow. If you say 20, we might agree. And those stocks tanked. Now, the reason I don't like this is Shkreli, the biotech bad guy.
Oh, yeah.
Is publicly short all these things. Because he's not a complete dolt, right? I mean, he fleeced a bunch of people, so he's not a good person, but he's pretty smart. And his analysis on these quantum companies was dead right. And I loved he has one that we actually talked to. I won't name names. But the stock went from 60 cents to $10. He says their fair value is a penny. Now, I think that's a little exaggerated, but these things, I think quantum is a long way off. I mean, a long way off. And so
certainly outside of a 10-year fund. Now, will it be something that can get acquired into that and you can
sure.
incremental gains? Potentially. Yeah.
Paying the right valuation, particularly in the private markets, and then selling into those public crazy numbers.
Right.
Great strategy. But and then the last one is data. And I loved, again, we're talking all about Jensen, but he talked a lot. He talked a lot at CES.
Yep.
And every word everyone hangs on. So I just have these all at my fingertips. But
Mark, is he going to be the new Steve Jobs of 2025? By not necessarily by innovation, but yeah.
It's not a turtleneck. It's not a turtle. Oh, I could do the turtleneck thing.
Very nice.
It's not the turtleneck, but yeah, I think so.
There's a vacancy. If he's nominated.
I will say the Jetson Nano is quite elegant. It's quite compact and quite elegant. The design, at least as they showed it, of the new, is it called the Mark? I mean, it might actually be named after me. No, I'm just kidding. I think it's called the Mark X or something like that. It was pretty elegant. So maybe, because that was Jobs' thing to me was he knew that you didn't really care.
Mm-hmm.
about the insides. It was all Intel inside. And he's like, no, what you care about is the elegance of the outside.
Right.
Is the iPod a much more pleasing device than the MP3 Dell player, the little stick? It just was. And then we put a little screen on it with the little round. I mean, I love that round dial. I can still remember that original dial. And, it was so elegant.
Yep.
And so, it's my big beef, right? If Steve Jobs were alive, my camera would not stick up.
He would never have allowed, I'll tell you that right now, Mark. He would have never allowed more than one lens on a camera, full stop. It was always about, this technology didn't exist yet. I'm going to disappear into a room. And when I come out, that technology is going to exist. It's orthogonal entirely to how Elon Musk does this, where he reportedly will actually sit with the engineer and says, no, exactly. What's the problem? Oh, no, if this line engineer hasn't given me what I needed. Okay, so then he'll drive his golf cart, in the Hyperloop down to where that person goes. And says, okay, so let's actually figure this out. Oh, it's a math problem. He'll sit in a whiteboard and try to figure it out. Jobs never did that. Well, famously, Jobs didn't know how to code. But beyond that, his thing was, if I motivate people and I can be this showman, people will rise to the occasion. I think, Jensen has this aura about him where, he certainly has done that to his stock price, Mark. Well, we can.
No, it's a great analogy. It's a great analogy. And it is about the showmanship.
Yeah.
And it's a good analogy. Now, what Jensen said was he quoted or paraphrased. Now, it was actually a direct quote. Eric Schmidt, who said in 2011 that, today and tomorrow, more data will be created than in the history of mankind. Now, I say it's a little bit of hyperbole because there was no data before 1954, but okay. And yes, and he said, in the next 2 years, more data will be created than all of mankind's history. Yes. And in fact, it might not even be a couple of years. It might be this year. The amazing stat to me is up until 2011, it was 5 petabytes.
Mm-hmm.
No, exabytes, bigger than petabytes, exabytes. And then in the 2 days in 2011, 5 exabytes. But today, of which we are contributing part of, it's 300 plus exabytes. So the amount of data and data, like my son's old company, Snowflake, it rocketed up to crazy valuations. And then it collapsed when people said, well, they have competitors like Databricks. And then someone said, AI, you're an AI company. And they're like, yes, we have all the data in our data lakes. So who better to run your training models than us? And the stock is on a tear again. And so data is the thing. And that's why ultimately the A, B, and C are all about the D. And it's why, what we do as VCs in this space, we get to have so much fun because we're talking about the intersection and the interrelationship between all these.
And I think that dovetails beautifully, Mark, with our chart of the week. And I must warn you, Mark, that it is a doozy of a chart. I know we're getting close to time here. It's published by our friends at McKinsey, and it ties in with sort of their predictions about, where are going to be some of the growth areas. And actually, right in that same range of time that Mr. Jetson was predicting here, George, not, sorry, bad joke.
Right. Yeah.
And
by George, we were promised flying cars by now, but we don't have those yet.
Mark, on this list at the very bottom, check out that there is a actual category for vehicles, future air mobility. So I thought that might fit that description. Mark, let me know if you can see this. This might be a little small.
A little small, but I can blow it up.
Okay. So for those that are on audio only, please do yourselves a favor, just as Mark and I do. We always come out with New Year's resolutions every year. May your New Year's resolution be to check out the video version of our podcast where we've got the Bitcoin stock reveal. We've got the clothing match reveal. And of course, we have the chart of the week. And what we're seeing here is a prediction by McKinsey of about 18 areas of tomorrow that can potentially generate, they say 29 trillion to 48 trillion in revenues. The idea here is not the number to me, Mark. It's more that these are basically very large growth potential areas, which are actually pretty big areas today. And then also some areas that people think that's what the future is supposed to be, the flying cars. But what we'll actually see over the next 15 years. So there's some kind of categories here that are just way larger than the others. But it's funny that you mentioned, Mark, the flying cars, because it actually is part of this way down at the bottom. But these are some categories that, these are some VC categories, right? That what you see in this is really just some things that are, I think, kind of boring from a VC perspective, but nonetheless are moneymakers, things like e-commerce, which are still showing this big shift that will continue to happen. Obviously, we're going to be counting all the records from Q4, which was a great spending season. AI and software services will continue to be part of that story of growth. But then, beyond that, there are a lot of categories which are also kind of similarly sized, which to me tells me that there could be potential for a breakout amongst everything else that's not e-commerce. Mark, when you see predictions of the future, McKinsey, they're smart guys. They're obviously and gals, they're putting in a lot of research and time into this. How much should an average person look at this report and think that this is just bunk versus this is something that they should actually, potentially take some action on?
Like everything, the questions are more important than the answers.
Yeah.
So, whenever you see these types of charts that show basically up and to the right, I call it the spreadsheetization of the world, right? Is every spreadsheet, every model goes up and to the right. They never have variability. They never show the actual path. They just go up and to the right. So, it's not going to be a smooth line growth from 4 trillion to 14 or as much as 20 trillion in e-commerce. But that one probably will be the smoothest of all of them because it's such a mature industry and the increasing amount of volume that goes through it because it's driven partly by volume, but also partly by inflation. Oh, yeah. I saw a great meme the other day. It was a big husky guy holding a toddler up to dunk the basketball. And the husky guy said inflation. And then the toddler said, me thinking I'm good at real estate over the last 10 years. I'm like, oh my God. There are so many people that fit that bill. And so e-commerce, yes, definitely. But it's a low margin business by and large, and it's dominated by a few. So not really a place I'm going to spend a lot of time thinking about. But if you want to own e-commerce related businesses as just money machines, yes, good. Are they core holding? Great. But you look at AI, 85 billion to 1.5 trillion. That's a much bigger and faster growth rate than 4 trillion to 14 trillion. So now the angle of our ascent is higher and it's probably parabolic. And so that's an area that we certainly want to play in. The one that I love is the next one, which is cloud, right? 220 billion going to 1.6 trillion. Now, that's not as fast a growth as AI software and services, but it's still really fast growth. And as we said, when FHE is perfected, every dollar of that is going to go to FHE as opposed to traditional cloud servers. So I think that's a big one. Electric vehicles, I'm pretty skeptical. I'm an electric vehicle owner, right? And, my 300-mile range car, I charged it last night, and it's so damn cold here in North Carolina, I'm down to 240. And when I took off this morning, it went from 240 to 219 because the heater went on. So I love my electric car. I love driving it. It's way better than any other car I've ever had, but it's useless for anything except around town. So yeah. I question anyone who needs to work. They need a truck. They're not buying electric. And Rivian, no, that's a status symbol. Drive your kids to soccer practice. It's not a work truck. Digital advertising, yeah, but I think that probably won't be as big because I think it's eaten by AI. The AIs aren't going to respond to advertising. They're just going to do their jobs. So I'm a little skeptical that semiconductors, love semis, because we're at the limits of physics. And now we've got to use new materials, photonics. So I think that one probably is even bigger.
Agreed. I'm surprised at how old it was.
Look, space, I get it. But once we have the satellite mesh, I don't know. I guess we need another satellite mesh to protect the satellite mesh from the predators. And then we need the other mesh on top of that mesh so maybe there's an arms race in space a little bit. So again,
it's already happening here in northern New Jersey, Mark. If you want to see any space battles, northern New Jersey is the capital right now.
There you go. And that's why you disappeared for a week. So,
yep, it all comes back.
Yeah. And look, cybersecurity, yes. As we've talked about, we need better, but that's linked to cloud and to semiconductors. It's about semiconductors being better at encryption. Battery technology, for sure. I mean, come on. The idea that we have enough power from the sun's radiation every day to power the planet for multiple years. The problem is we can't capture most of that. And so there's actually a very interesting play here. Solar. So Chinese solar companies been decimated, a bunch of bankruptcies, but they dominate the space. And there are some opportunities in solar that I think are going to be monster winners. That may be part of the surprises next week. So, video and gaming, of course. I hate to admit this, but I'm not as bad as some of the people that are into Monster Hunter, but I am a little bit on pins and needles for the next 6 weeks until Monster Hunter Wilds comes out, because the change in graphics and activity between the current Monster Hunter and this, it's mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling. And, we've all seen the pictures of the AI, and it's talking to us, and it's starting to look really real. And there was a hilarious one today where a woman, and it's always women for some reason, because God, I'm watching it, right? But it was a woman talking about going to Buc-ee's, right? The truck stop. It was hilarious. I mean, it was absolutely hilarious. And yeah, you could tell it was AI and it wasn't very, but still pretty good. And it was generated with a machine instead of paying an actress.
And within gaming this year, Mark, we didn't mention this in our predictions, but we're on bated breath to see what Nintendo does with the new Switch. Speaking of the gaming.
The Switch 2. Yeah. I can't wait. And they better not fumble this, because they kind of went dark on us.
Oh, yeah.
And I think they better start releasing some info. So if they're listening, maybe they should do something. But
absolutely. We should get them on the show. That should be a 2025 guest.
That would be good. That would be good.
Yep. So I guess the last one here, Mark, that is nuclear fission power plants, which was a huge discovery and breakthrough. But the problem there was, like so many of these, future technologies, it's just not efficient. If you can make it work, like cloud, yes, it can be very efficient. But just in the sheer physics of it is not there yet. So I'm though excited to see that it has been listed. But I think these are fun to do from time to time, certainly at the beginning of the year, Mark, where we can see, what are some categories for potential breakthroughs. But I always kind of use my weather analogy sometimes to talk about investments, where, the best predictor of tomorrow's weather is today's weather, right? So that's one thing to look about. Exactly right.
Look outside.
Exactly right.
And I couldn't agree more. I do think that nuclear one, everyone's talking about it, and, Microsoft is firing up 3 Mile Island. And
right.
The dirty little secret about AI is it uses a lot of power, way more power than Bitcoin and other digital assets. And no one ever talks about it because, well, it's Sam Altman, and we love Sam Altman. He's in trouble now with his sister or whatever. And again, I'm not saying any of it's true, but when siblings start suing each other publicly, that's never good. And so, but people are ignoring that. And there are companies, portfolio companies that we have like Grok and others that are solving for this by creating more power efficient ways of processing information. And some of that's going to be silicon based. Some of it's going to be new materials based. Some of it, like Encharge, I love these guys in the sense that, you got the processor over here and the memory over here, and the stuff's got to go back and forth, and the more it goes back and forth, the hotter your computer gets, right? My computer's hot right now. And I go, he said, well, why don't I just put them together? Because you can't do that. So, well, watch me. And he did. And now he has a chip that can process just as fast, but it doesn't get hot. So you can stuff it in a laptop and actually do AI on the edge. That's really cool innovation. And that was, I don't think it was easy. I'm not trying to diminish what he did, but it was a simple idea that what I love about innovation most times is it requires people to imagine the unimaginable, right? And so anyone who's used a computer, we're like, well, my processor's over there, my memory's over there. But an innovator says, well, but why? And I use this example too many times, but to me, it's like all the talk about humanoid robots. Are we sure that that's the right form factor?
Sure.
Is that the best form factor? Or are those robotic dogs, who I am terrified of, more the form factor for robots? I don't know, maybe. And so I think the innovators had that ability to ignore. It's like a songwriter, right? I mean, the Bare Naked Ladies, play these same four chords. It's all been done. The song, It's All Been Done. Many, 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 many songs use the same four chords.
Right.
Right? It's amazing. And they're like, so shouldn't every song that ever could be written already be written if it's only four chords? It's like, well, no, because just like A, T, C, and G, you can create all of life from those four building blocks. You can create lots of new stuff. But the problem with writing a song, I'm never going to be a songwriter because every time I sit to try to think of something, all I can do is hear something that I've already heard. And I want to do that. Or the last riff I played. Not that I play any riffs very well. But you would be proud of me. I have graduated from What's Going On. And I can, like every other beginning guitarist, I can now play Wonderwall.
That was the big question in 2024. Would Wonderwall kind of now make the repertoire? Because every guitarist, musician has their repertoire. So now you have it.
Yes, I got Wonderwall, but the fun one, I can play a bar song now by Shabuzi. So
wow,
not that it's very complicated, but although I will say, and the whippersnappers are going to laugh, I cannot move my fingers as fast as when I watch. Like I watched Dolly Parton the other night.
Oh yeah,
in 2-inch long acrylic nails, playing flawless, doing finger style. Like, how does she do that?
It's a good question, which we will never have the answer to that. And it's probably a fitting way to wrap up as today we're recording this on Elvis's birthday or would be birthday.
Elvis's birthday, my little guy's birthday.
All right.
William George, actually in the hospital, they wrote William George Elvis Yusko 14 years ago today. Thankfully, there's only 3 lines for your name. So they had to drop one. So we do call him the king behind his back. But Elvis's birthday, Will Yusko's birthday, and probably appropriate to talk about the great songstress Dolly Parton. So.
Well, we'll give a huge happy birthday to Will, and also remind our listeners, welcome back to 2025. Big things coming this year. Last year was a banner year. We recorded a ton of episodes and shorts and other media for you all. Please continue to rate, review, and subscribe. And as always, remember to stay current. Thank you for joining us this week on Digital Currents. Check out our links to our website and social media in the show's description box. Please make sure to subscribe if you like what you hear. And remember, stay current.
This podcast should not be construed as investment advice nor solicitation for the sale of any security, advisory, or other service. Investment themes and ideas discussed may be owned by funds managed by the host and podcast guests. Any conflicts at the time of production have been mentioned by the host but are subject to change. Listeners should consult their personal financial advisors before making any investment decisions.